When my wife chose her boss over me, I felt like my world shattered. But what I did next wasn't what anyone expected, including them. This is the story of how two lives unraveled, and how I took back control in the quietest way possible. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm a systems analyst at a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle. It's not a glamorous job, but I've always taken pride in my work. I enjoy solving problems, organizing chaos into logic. And for a long time, I thought my life reflected that same balance, stable, predictable, and good. For the past 7 years, I'd come home to the same warm smile, the same comforting scent of jasmine Rachel always wore, and the little routines that stitched our life together. She was my wife, my partner, and honestly, my best friend. We met in college, clicked instantly, and built a life I believed was strong enough to last anything. Our house wasn't fancy, but it felt like home. We had a goofy golden retriever named Max, Friday pizza nights, and a shared Google Calendar filled with dinner plans, doctor's appointments, and weekend hikes. It sounds boring, maybe, but to me it was everything. I loved the quiet moments mornings when we'd sip coffee in silence, just happy to be in each other's company. Rachel worked in marketing for a growing finance company. She was ambitious, driven, always talking about quarterly goals and presentations. I was proud of her. When she landed a big promotion last year, I celebrated like it was my own success. I didn't realize then that it marked the beginning of a shift I couldn't see, or maybe just didn't want to. If I'm being honest, I started noticing little things. She came home later, said she was too tired to talk, spent more time on her phone, nothing dramatic, just enough to register as a quiet hum of unease in the background. But I ignored it. We were just going through a phase, I told myself. Everyone hits a rough patch now and then. Besides, we were fine. We had to be. I believed in what we built in her and us. I kept showing up, doing my part, trusting that the foundation we'd laid over the years would hold. I didn't know it at the time, but the life I thought was perfect was already starting to unravel. And the woman I loved most was slowly slipping away from me. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind we used to share, but a different silence, the kind that filled the air like fog. Thick, uncomfortable. I'd come home from work, ask how Rachel's day had gone, and she'd mumble something vague before disappearing into her office with her laptop. She said there was a lot going on at work, that she was just exhausted. And I believed her, at first. We stopped having dinner together. She'd eat late or say she'd already eaten at the office. Our Friday pizza nights turned into her working overtime, and the weekend hikes, they disappeared too. I remember suggesting we go to the coast one weekend, just the two of us like old times, and she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe another time, she said, brushing me off like it was nothing. Max, our dog, even started waiting by the door less. He used to get excited the second he heard Rachel's car. Now he barely lifted his head when she came home. Dogs notice things people don't want to admit. One evening I saw her texting late into the night. She angled the phone away from me like she didn't want me to see. I tried not to jump to conclusions. Paranoia wasn't like me. I trusted her. I loved her. But something had shifted, and that something was starting to eat away at me. I asked her if everything was okay between us. I remember the way she looked at me, almost surprised, like I'd caught her off guard. Of course, she said too quickly, just work stress. But her hugs didn't linger anymore. Her kiss goodnight was more habit than affection. It was like living with a ghost of the woman I married. One night I stayed up staring at the ceiling long after she'd fallen asleep beside me. I kept wondering what I did wrong, what I missed, what I could fix. That's who I was, the guy who fixed things. But no matter how many scenarios I played in my head, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong. Still, I clung to hope. Maybe it really was work. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe if I held on tight enough, things would settle. I didn't know it then, but I was already holding on to a version of her that no longer existed. The truth hit me on a Tuesday. It was one of those cold, gray Seattle mornings when everything feels a little heavier. Rachel had left early for a last-minute meeting, and I was working from home. I went to grab my laptop from the living room, and her iPad was lying there on the couch. She rarely used it, but it was still linked to her iMessages. I wish I could say I wasn't the kind of man who snoops. I wish I could tell you I respected her privacy and trusted her enough to walk away. But the knot in my stomach had grown too tight to ignore. My hands moved before my conscience could catch up. The first thing I saw was a message from someone named D. Derek. It wasn't just one message, it was a thread. A whole stream of texts filled with inside jokes, flirtation, late-night confessions, and things I never imagined Rachel saying to anyone else. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. He has no idea. Honestly, I feel freer than I have in years. You're the only one who really sees me. Each message felt like a punch to the gut. The truth hit me on a Tuesday. It was one of those cold, gray Seattle mornings when everything feels a little heavier. Rachel had left early for a last-minute meeting, and I was working from home. As I reached for my laptop on the couch, I noticed her iPad still sitting there. She rarely used it, but I knew it was synced to her messages. I hesitated, I really did. But the silence between us had grown louder than my conscience. My gut had been screaming for weeks, maybe longer, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I unlocked the iPad. The first message I saw was from someone labeled just D. Derek. It was a name I'd heard in passing, her boss. She mentioned him before, casually, like he was just another person in her office. I had no idea he was so much more. I opened the thread. My heart started pounding before I read a single word. Last night was incredible, still thinking about you. He has no idea. Honestly, it feels good not to hide anymore. You're the only one who gets me. D, when I'm with you, I feel alive. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every line I read chipped away at something inside me. I scrolled and kept scrolling, not even realizing the tears had started falling. Pictures, hotel confirmations, private jokes, words she used to say to me, now written for someone else, someone who clearly knew I existed and didn't care. I set the iPad down, trembling. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. Max came and nudged my leg, sensing something was off. I knelt beside him and buried my face in his fur, trying to stay grounded. I wanted to scream, punch something, demand answers, but instead I just sat there, letting the weight of it all sink in. She had chosen him. While I was holding on, trying to make things work, she was already gone. Not just emotionally, but physically, mentally, spiritually. My wife had become someone I didn't recognize. The betrayal wasn't just in her actions, but in the ease with which she walked away, like I was a chapter she'd finished reading. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this end with me broken. Rachel came home late that night. She walked in like everything was normal, humming softly, kicking off her heels by the door like she always did. She didn't notice my stare at first, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. "How was your day?" she asked, not even looking up as she opened the fridge. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, my chest tight. I had practiced a dozen things I wanted to say, things I needed to say, but none of them felt real enough for the moment. So I just said, "Who's Derek?" That stopped her cold. She froze mid-reach, her hand still hovering over a water bottle. Her back stiffened. She turned slowly, her face carefully blank. "What are you talking about?" I pulled her iPad from under a folder on the table and placed it on the counter. I saw the messages. The silence that followed felt like a bomb going off in slow motion. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry or beg or even look ashamed. She just sighed like I was an inconvenience. "I was going to tell you," she said flatly. "It just never felt like the right time." That was it. 7 years of love, trust, partnership, reduced to a shrug and a cowardly excuse. My heart didn't just break, it fractured in ways I didn't know were possible. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like a fool who hadn't seen what was right in front of him. "Was it just once?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She looked at me, then looked away. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "It just did." That's when the dam inside me broke. You didn't mean to? You didn't mean to betray me, lie to me, build a second life while I was here trying to hold ours together." Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were for me or for her own guilt. "I think I love him," she said. Those words were a knife. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I just stood there quietly dying inside. Eventually, she walked out of the kitchen. I didn't follow. I sat alone at the table, staring at nothing, feeling everything. In that moment, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the illusion of the life I thought we had. But in that emptiness, something else began to stir, the quiet spark of clarity. The next morning, the house felt hollow, like it knew something had changed. Rachel was already gone. No note, no text, just an empty side of the bed and the lingering scent of her perfume in the air. I stood there, staring at the imprint she'd left on the pillow, and I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Done waiting, done hurting, done begging for scraps of love from someone who had already given her heart to someone else. I didn't call her, I didn't try to fix anything. I showered, dressed, and drove to the office like it was any other day. But inside, something had shifted. There was no more confusion, no more desperate hope. Just quiet resolve. At lunch, I walked to the park down the street, sat on a bench, and stared at the trees swaying in the wind. I thought about how we planted a tree in our backyard the day we moved in. She named it, said we'd watch it grow together. I guess not everything survives. Later that evening, she came home, looking like she didn't know what to expect. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, as if preparing for a fight. Instead, I just said, "I think you should stay with him." She blinked. "What?" "You want Derek, you chose him, so go be with him, I won't stand in your way." Her face twisted with something, maybe guilt, maybe regret, but I didn't care anymore. "I'll pack some things and go to my sister's," she mumbled. I nodded. "Take what you need." There was no dramatic scene, no final goodbye kiss, just two people standing in the wreckage of what used to be love. She left quietly, and I closed the door behind her. But that door didn't just close on her. It closed on the version of me who tolerated being second choice. I stood there for a long time, Max at my feet, the silence thick but no longer suffocating. Something inside me had cracked open, not in the way pain destroys, but in the way it clears space. I didn't know exactly what I'd do next, but I knew I wasn't going to play the victim. They thought I'd crumble, but I already had a plan. I'm not a vengeful man by nature, but I'm not stupid either. After Rachel walked out, I gave myself a few days to feel everything, the hurt, the shame, the hollow ache in my chest. But when the fog finally lifted, I realized something. Derek didn't just take my wife. He humiliated me. He crossed a line both personal and professional. And I wasn't going to let that slide. I've always believed the best revenge isn't loud or messy. It's quiet, strategic, complete. I work in cybersecurity. I specialize in data architecture and internal systems audits, which is a fancy way of saying I know where the digital skeletons are buried. I'd done consulting for Rachel's company a year prior. That's how she and Derek first met. At the time, I helped them tighten vulnerabilities and build compliance systems. That access had long since expired, but I still knew how their infrastructure worked. And more importantly, I knew how to find public legal breadcrumbs most people ignore. SEC filings, department logs, employee reviews, a few anonymous Glassdoor tips. It was all there, just scattered. I spent late nights gathering data. Not hacking, not breaking any laws, just compiling, observing. Derek's signature was all over shady approvals. Overpaid consultants that traced back to shell companies. One of them had Rachel's name on it, too. It clicked. She wasn't just cheating emotionally or physically. She was involved in something unethical, maybe illegal. And from the looks of it, she didn't even realize how far in she was. I documented everything. I created a neat, bulletproof file, timelines, transactions, screen captures. I wasn't going to blast it online or expose it for attention. No, I had a better audience in mind, the board of directors. One anonymous email, sent from a secured burner domain with attached evidence labeled simply, "Internal concerns, executive conflict of interest." I didn't feel glee when I hit send, just calm. Like the scales were beginning to balance again. I didn't want to destroy her, but I wanted truth, accountability. I wanted him, Derek, to know that some men don't fight with fists, some fight with facts. And I wanted her to know that walking away from me didn't mean walking away from consequences. It didn't take long. 3 days after I sent the email, the fallout began. It started quietly with a few whispers at Rachel's company. Then came a sudden board meeting, unannounced but very much urgent. I kept tabs from a distance, my contact in the compliance team feeding me bits and pieces. "Something big's going down," he texted. "They're investigating Derek, internal audits." HR locked his office. I didn't respond. I just stared at that message, feeling a strange blend of justice and sorrow. I didn't expect to feel any sadness for Rachel, but a part of me still remembered the woman I married, the woman I used to trust with everything. That version of her was gone, but the memory of her stung more than I wanted to admit. The next day, it all spilled into the open. Derek was suspended pending an internal investigation. Apparently, someone from accounting, spooked by the audit, came forward with even more dirt. Fake vendor contracts, misallocated bonuses, expense reports that made no sense. Rachel's name showed up multiple times. She wasn't fired, not yet, but she was put on leave. And when her HR meeting ended, she did something I didn't expect. She showed up at my door. I opened it to find her standing there, makeup smudged, hair messy, panic in her eyes. "You did this," she whispered, like it was a fact, not a question. I didn't deny it. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you ruin my life like this?" That word ruined hit wrong. "Ruin," I said calmly. "You ruined your own life when you chose him, when you lied, when you got involved in things you didn't even understand." She broke down then, right there on the porch, but I didn't reach for her. I didn't try to comfort her. I wasn't that man anymore. "You said you felt alive with him," I added. "Now you get to live with what that really means." She looked up at me hollow. "I never thought you'd do this." I nodded. "Yeah, you counted on me being weak, on me just disappearing." Then I stepped back and closed the door. And for the first time since this all began, I felt strong. Not angry, not bitter. Just strong. After Rachel's door closed, silence wrapped around the house like a thick blanket. It was heavier than before, but different somehow. It wasn't the silence of confusion or heartbreak anymore. It was the silence of someone who had made a choice and was ready to move forward. Max curled up beside me on the couch, his warmth a small comfort. I looked around the living room, our living room, and realized that this space, once filled with dreams and shared plans, was now a blank slate. It was both terrifying and freeing. I knew I had a long road ahead. The first few days were the hardest. Every little thing reminded me of what was lost: her favorite mug in the cabinet, the clothes she left behind, the echoes of laughter that no longer filled the rooms. But instead of sinking into despair, I forced myself to focus on the future. I started running again, something I'd given up years ago. The early mornings, the cold air, the steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement helped clear my mind. I began to eat healthier, cook for myself, and reconnect with old friends I'd drifted from. I even signed up for a pottery class, something totally out of my comfort zone, but oddly therapeutic. Most importantly, I began to rebuild my self-worth. I realized that the man I'd been, the man who put Rachel on a pedestal and ignored the warning signs, wasn't the man I wanted to be anymore. I didn't need to be defined by betrayal or loss. I could define myself by resilience, by strength, by the ability to rise after falling. At work, I threw myself into projects with renewed focus. The office was quieter without Rachel and Derek, but the tension lifted. I earned respect for handling the situation professionally, and even found myself mentoring younger colleagues who admired my steadiness. One evening, while sitting on the porch, I caught my reflection in the window. The man staring back looked different, not just older, but wiser, tougher, and somehow lighter. The cracks that betrayal left in my heart had started to heal, replaced by scars that told a story of survival. I knew there would be hard days ahead, days when memories would sting and loneliness would creep in. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because I had learned something crucial. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. And I was ready to find who I really was. Life was settling into a steady rhythm, the kind you build after losing everything and choosing to move on. I was proud of the man I was becoming, independent, focused, and unexpectedly at peace. Then out of nowhere, the call came. It was Rachel's voice, shaky and quiet on the other end of the line. "I need your help," she said. I almost dropped the phone. It had been months since we last spoke, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to reopen that chapter. "Why?" I asked cautiously. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "It's Derek. The company fired him. They're also investigating me. I don't know what to do. I'm scared." For a moment, my gut reaction was to hang up, to tell her to face the consequences on her own. But then something unexpected happened, a small flicker of the man I once was, the man who believed in second chances. I asked, "What do you need?" She explained how the investigation was dragging her into a mess deeper than she'd imagined. Contracts were scrutinized, audits reopened. Her reputation was on the line. She wanted me to help her not just professionally but personally. I hesitated. The old me might have jumped in without question, but the new me weighed the cost. Helping her meant opening old wounds. It meant trusting a woman who had once betrayed me. Still, I knew this was my moment to decide what kind of man I wanted to be. "All right," I said finally. "I'll help, but on one condition: complete honesty, no more lies." She agreed. As I listened to her story, piecing together the mess from her side, I felt something else, a strange sense of power. This time I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the one being hurt. I was the one holding the map through this chaos. Helping her didn't erase the past, but it gave me control over the future. And that scared her more than anything. Because now, for the first time, I was in the driver's seat. Helping Rachel through the mess wasn't easy. There were long nights poring over documents, late calls trying to untangle contracts, and moments when the old anger flared up sharp and raw. But through it all, something shifted between us. Not the love we once had, but a quiet respect for each other's strength. The board cleared Rachel after the investigation. She wasn't fired, but she lost her executive position. Derek, on the other hand, was gone for good. The scandal buried his career. I heard through the grapevine he moved to another city, trying to start over. I didn't gloat, I didn't rub it in. Because what mattered wasn't their downfall, it was what I had rebuilt within myself. I learned that betrayal isn't just about the other person's choices. It's about how you respond when the ground shifts beneath your feet. I could have broken. I could have stayed bitter. But instead, I chose growth. Rachel and I never got back together. Our paths were too different now. But I don't hate her. I don't even resent her anymore. She was a chapter in my life, painful, yes, but necessary. I'm still here, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next. Sometimes life breaks you so it can rebuild you, better, tougher, and more real. I look at Max lying by my feet and smile. We've both been through a lot. But we're still standing. And that's what counts.